Caught my widowed neighbor in my garden. Turns out she was a fugitive Apache woman. John had always enjoyed the quiet rhythm of his mornings. The neighborhood was still, the sun just beginning to spill golden light over the rooftops and trees. Birds chirped softly, the gentle hum of early traffic in the distance barely reaching him. For John, the garden was his sanctuary. A small fenced patch behind his house where roses, tomatoes, and herbs grew under his careful attention. Every morning he would step outside, stretch, and take a slow breath of the crisp air, feeling a strange sense of peace as he tended to the soil, trimmed the plants, and watched the subtle changes in the greenery. It was his ritual, a way to greet the day without rushing or stress, a chance to be entirely alone with his thoughts. On this particular morning the air was cool, with a soft breeze that carried the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. John moved slowly, pruning the roses near the back corner, when he noticed something unusual out of the corner of his eye. A shadow moved between the rows of his vegetable plants, subtle but deliberate. Her first thought was that it might be a rabbit or some other small animal. But the movement was too purposeful. It wasn't jumping or scurrying. It was deliberate, human. John straightened up and squinted. Sure enough, a woman was crouched near his tomato plants, carefully stepping over the soil as if she didn't want to disturb anything. She froze when she realized he was watching her, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, John's mind raced. Who could it be?
He knew every neighbor, and this wasn't someone he had seen before wandering the streets.
His first instinct was caution, a little fear even. The neighborhood had been quiet for years, and the idea of someone sneaking around in his private garden was unsettling. Then, as she stood, he recognized her. It was Mrs. Elena Ramirez, a widow who had moved into the house across the street nearly a year ago. She was quiet, reserved, and kept mostly to herself. John had exchanged polite nods and smiles with her, but knew very little about her life. Seeing her here, crouched in his garden before dawn, was completely unexpected.
Mrs. Ramirez? John called gently, trying to keep his voice calm. What are you doing in my garden?
She startled visibly, stepping back as if she had been frozen in place and didn't know what to do next. Her face was pale in the soft morning light, and her eyes darted nervously, scanning the fence line, as though she expected someone else to be there. I didn't mean any harm, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. I was just walking and I needed a place to rest for a moment.
John hesitated. There was something in her tone, uneasy, cautious, but honest, that made him pause.
She didn't seem like a criminal or a thief. She didn't have anything in her hands, and her clothing, though worn, was tidy. Her shoes were muddy from the garden soil, and her jacket had a few small tears, as if it had been through a lot of wear.
Why didn't you just come to the front? John asked, trying to keep his suspicion in check.
You could have knocked on the door, hiding, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. I couldn't. I don't have anyone to ask. I needed. I just needed to be alone for a little while. She paused, looking down at the ground, then back at John. I'm sorry if I startled you. I didn't mean to scare anyone. John noticed the tremor in her hands as she held them close to her chest. He felt a mixture of concern and curiosity. Something about her seemed fragile but also determined. It was clear she had been careful not to get noticed until now, and that caution told John she had reasons for being secretive. All right, he said slowly, relaxing his stance. I'm not angry. But you need to be honest with me. Why are you in my garden at this hour? Elena took a deep breath and seemed to gather herself.
I've been moving through the area, she said quietly. I didn't know where else to go.
I just needed a quiet spot. Your garden? It seems safe for a moment. John was surprised by her honesty. He had expected evasive answers, lies, or excuses. Instead, she spoke in simple, halting words, carefully chosen. She looked him in the eye, and John sensed a kind of vulnerability he couldn't ignore. She was not trying to deceive him. She was trying to survive a situation he didn't yet understand. Sit down, he said finally, stepping toward a small bench near the side of the garden. Have some water. You look like you need it. Elena hesitated, then slowly nodded, breast. She followed him, her movements careful, almost tentative, as if every step could draw unwanted attention. John handed her a glass of water, watching her take it with shaky hands. She sipped slowly, her eyes scanning the garden again, always alert. They sat in silence for a few moments, the air filled with the quiet sounds of morning, the rustle of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, the faint hum of a passing car. John wanted to ask more questions, but he didn't want to push her too hard. Instead, he waited, letting her decide whether to share more. Finally, Elena spoke. I haven't had a safe place in a long time, she said quietly. People I once knew. They wouldn't leave me alone. I had to keep moving, keep hiding. I didn't have anyone I could trust. Her voice wavered, and John realized she had been carrying some heavy burden for a long time. John felt a pang of empathy. He had never imagined that someone in his quiet, orderly neighborhood could have a life filled with fear and uncertainty. You don't have to explain everything, he said gently, but you should know this isn't the way to handle it. It's dangerous to be out like this alone.
Elena nodded, looking down at her hands.
I know. I didn't have a choice. But I just needed a moment to breathe. John understood. He had never been in her situation, but he could see the truth in her eyes. She was a woman who had learned to survive through caution and silence. She had probably avoided attention her entire life, and now here she was, caught in a garden before dawn, exposed but still wary. All right, he said after a pause. You can stay here for a bit. Just don't wander around the neighborhood like this. People will start asking questions. Elena nodded gratefully, a small flicker of relief crossing her face. She sat on the bench, hands folded in her lap, finally allowing herself a brief moment of rest. John returned to his pruning, though his mind was no longer fully on the roses. He found himself wondering what kind of life could lead a quiet, seemingly ordinary woman to move through the neighborhood like a shadow. For John, the morning had begun as usual, with the comforting rhythm of gardening. But now it had taken an unexpected turn. A glimpse into a life hidden beneath a calm exterior. A story he could not yet fully understand. And though he did not know it yet, this encounter would mark the beginning of a relationship that would change both their lives. An unlikely bond formed in the quiet light of an early spring morning, among the roses and vegetables of a suburban garden. The sun continued to rise, casting longer shadows across the neatly kept rows of plants. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and the morning air smelled of soil and growing things. Yet for John, there was a new awareness now, a sense that even in the quietest neighborhoods, extraordinary stories could unfold without warning, And sometimes, a simple morning in the garden could bring a world far larger than one had ever imagined. The next few days passed quietly, but for John, the morning when he had caught Elena in his garden left a lingering curiosity he could not shake. Every time he stepped outside to tend to his roses or water his tomato plants, his thoughts wandered to the mysterious widow. There was something in her presence, in her cautious eyes and careful movements, that hinted at a story far more complicated than he could imagine.
He wondered why she had been wandering through the neighborhood so early in the morning and why she had avoided everyone else.
One afternoon, John spotted Elena again, walking along the quiet sidewalk across from his house. She moved quickly, almost gliding along the pavement, her head down, hands tucked inside her jacket pockets. Breaths. Her steps were careful, measured, as if she were constantly evaluating her surroundings for potential threats. John waved gently, and to his surprise she paused. She looked up, startled, then gave a small nod before continuing. John knew he wanted to talk to her again, to understand more, but he also knew he had to be cautious, respected her privacy and her evident need for discretion. That evening, he decided to leave a small tray of food at the edge of his garden, just inside the gate, with a note that read, "No questions tonight. Just some food." John. The next morning, he found the tray empty, and the note gone. He did not see her, but he felt a small sense of connection, a silent acknowledgement that she had noticed his gesture. It was the first hint of trust between them, fragile and uncertain, but promising. Later that day, John returned to his garden to continue his pruning. He was deep in thought when he noticed movement among the tomato plants. Before he could react, Elena emerged from the shadows, standing at the edge of the garden. She did not rush or hide. Instead, she seemed to weigh her options carefully before stepping forward. "Good morning," John said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "You're up early again." Elena nodded, her expression guarded.
I didn't mean to bother you yesterday. Sometimes I need to find quiet places to think."
John gestured to the bench near the roses. "Sit. You can stay a while. There's no one here to bother you." She hesitated, then slowly approached, her steps deliberate. Once she sat, she folded her hands in her lap, glancing around as though making sure the neighborhood remained quiet. John handed her a glass of water, and they sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of passing cars. After a long pause, Elena spoke. "I haven't had a place to feel safe in a long time," she said quietly. People I once trusted, they turned against me. I had to leave everything behind."
I couldn't stay anywhere too long. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the weight of her memories.
John nodded, listening carefully. He wanted to ask questions, but he also sensed that pressing her for details might frighten her. Instead, he offered words of reassurance. "You don't have to tell me everything right now," he said gently. "I just want you to know that here, you're safe. No one will hurt you in my garden." Elena's eyes softened, though a flicker of fear remained. "I know," she whispered. "It's just hard to trust anyone after what I've been through." John understood. Her caution was not merely a habit. It was a survival skill. He had met many people in his life, but rarely had he encountered someone so alert, so attuned to danger even when none seemed present. He realized that her quiet demeanor and careful movements were shields she had developed over years of uncertainty and fear. For the next several mornings, a subtle routine developed. Elena would appear at dawn, often without warning, and John would offer her water, sometimes bread or fruit. They did not speak much at first. Words seemed unnecessary, and perhaps even risky, given her need for discretion. But slowly, She began to share small fragments of her life. She spoke of her late husband, a kind man who had treated her with respect and love, and of the loneliness that followed his death. She mentioned moving from town to town, avoiding people who might recognize her, seeking solitude in quiet neighborhoods. Every story she told was careful, measured, revealing only what she chose to share. Yet, through her words, John began to piece together the outline of a life shaped by both love and loss, by danger and resilience. One morning, as they sat on the bench watching the sunrise, John asked cautiously, "Why don't you ever tell anyone where you're from?" Elena's hands tightened in her lap. She looked away, staring at the soil beneath the tomato plants as if the answer were written there. "Because some places, some people, they won't let me live in peace,"
she said quietly.
"I've had to move too many times. I've had to hide who I really am. Sometimes it's easier not to say anything at all." John nodded slowly, understanding the gravity behind her words. He realized that her life was not just unusual, it was dangerous in ways he could barely comprehend. Yet, despite the risks she faced, she continued to seek brief moments of normalcy, small pieces of peace wherever she could find them. His garden had become one of those rare sanctuaries. Over the following days, John noticed subtle patterns in her behavior. She was always alert, scanning the surroundings as she moved, as if anticipating threats that no one else could see. She avoided busy streets, moved silently along sidewalks, and often vanished without warning. Yet despite her caution, she returned to his garden, drawn by the sense of safety it offered. One afternoon, John decided to gently probe further, hoping to understand her situation better without scaring her. "You've been careful, very careful," he said. "But I need to know, is someone after you?" Elena's eyes widened, and she looked around nervously before leaning closer. "I can't explain everything," she whispered. "But yes, there are people I need to avoid. Not everyone is safe to trust."
"I've learned that the hard way." John's mind raced.
He had suspected that there was more to her story, but hearing her confirmation added a new layer of intensity. He realized that Elena's quiet, measured life was not just a result of shyness or privacy. It was a strategy for survival. Her cautious nature, her avoidance of public spaces, her reluctance to speak freely, they were all necessary defenses. Despite the tension, John felt a growing empathy for her. He admired her resilience, her ability to navigate the world with such careful precision despite the dangers she faced. He also felt a sense of responsibility, to share small pieces of her story, and he could not ignore that trust. That evening, John left another small tray of food at the edge of the garden, along with a note. "You can come whenever you need. No questions, no judgment." John. The next morning, the tray was empty. Dorns felt a mix of relief and curiosity. Elena was cautious, yes, but she had also acknowledged his gesture. It was a subtle sign of trust, a fragile connection that had begun to form between them. Over time, their interactions remained delicate, measured, and careful. Words were chosen thoughtfully, movements deliberate, but the bond was undeniable. John began to see Elena not just as a mysterious neighbor, but as a person with a complex life, someone who had faced dangers most people could never imagine. Each morning in the garden became a small ritual of understanding, trust, and shared silence. While the world outside remained unaware of her presence, the garden became a place of safety, where fears could be set aside if only for a brief moment. Through these quiet encounters, John learned the value of patience, empathy, and discretion. He realized that sometimes the most profound connections are formed, not through grand gestures or loud declarations, but through simple acts of kindness, understanding, and shared silence. Elena continued to come to the garden, cautious yet drawn by the rare feeling of security it offered. John, in turn, found himself watching her carefully, respecting her boundaries while offering support in whatever small ways he could. They were two people from very different worlds, brought together by circumstance, curiosity, and the quiet hope of finding peace amidst uncertainty. The days passed, each one marked by careful observation, cautious conversation, and small gestures of trust. John knew that he had stumbled upon something extraordinary, a glimpse into a life hidden beneath quiet streets and polite nods. A story that was unfolding one small moment at a time in the early morning light of his garden. And though the full story of Elena's past remained hidden, the bond they were forming was real. It was fragile, delicate, and built on understanding rather than assumptions. It was the beginning of a relationship that would test boundaries, challenge fears, and ultimately reveal truths neither of them had expected to confront in the quiet suburb they called home. Days turned into weeks, and John's curiosity about Elena only grew. Their morning encounters had become a quiet ritual. She no longer seemed as startled when he saw her. She would step into the garden with a cautious grace, her eyes still alert, but less afraid. Yet John knew there was more to her story, something she had not told him. The cautious way she moved, the way she avoided streets and people, hinted at a life shaped by secrets. One morning, John arrived in the garden to find Elena already there, kneeling among the tomato plants, as if she had been watching over them overnight. She looked up when she heard him approach, her eyes reflecting a mixture of wariness and relief. John noticed something different about her today, a subtle tension in her posture, a shadow behind her eyes, as though she carried a burden too heavy for words. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Morning," Elena replied, her voice quiet. She straightened and offered a small, tired smile. "Desk. I didn't sleep well." John nodded.
I can see it. If you want, we can talk, or we can just sit.
Whatever feels safer. Then sank onto the bench near the roses.
She folded her hands in her lap and looked down at the ground. For a long moment, neither spoke. The garden was quiet, filled with the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. John sensed that she was struggling with something inside, and he chose patience. Bas. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "There's more to me than I've told you," she admitted. I haven't been completely honest because I didn't want anyone to know. Not here, not in this neighborhood." John waited, giving her the space to continue. He knew that trust had to be earned, and she was choosing to share a piece of herself with him.
"I'm not who I appear to be," Elena said quietly.
I have been hiding my true identity for many years.
I had to leave my home, leave my family, even change my name to survive. Her hands shook slightly as she clasped them together. It's complicated, but the short version is that I am of Apache descent, and my family's situation was dangerous. I had to flee to avoid people who would harm me. Dying. John listened intently. He had heard of people hiding from threats, but he had never imagined it could happen so close to his own quiet neighborhood. "Apache descent?" he asked carefully. "You mean your heritage?" Elena nodded. "Yes, my ancestors were Apache, and I carry their blood and history. But that has also brought challenges. Some members of my family, they were not kind. They wanted to control my life in ways I could not accept. I had to escape, legally and physically, to find safety. That meant leaving everything familiar behind, becoming someone else in the eyes of the world." John felt a mixture of astonishment and respect. He had never known anyone with such a layered and complex past. Her life was not merely unusual. It was extraordinary, shaped by courage, survival, and resilience.
He realized that the cautious, alert woman he saw each morning had endured hardships most people could not imagine.
How long have you been on the run? John asked gently, careful not to push too hard. Elena looked down at her hands. Many years. Too many. Every time I think I am safe, something reminds me that danger can return. That's why I move quietly, avoid attention, and trust very few people.
She glanced up at John, her eyes searching his face.
You're one of the few who hasn't judged me or tried to push me away. That means more than I can explain. John felt a lump in his throat. He had never considered himself heroic or particularly special, yet here was a woman entrusting him with pieces of her life that she had hidden from nearly everyone. He wanted to help, but he knew he had to tread carefully. You don't have to tell me everything, he said softly. Just knowing that you trust me enough to share this much is enough. I won't betray that trust.
Elena exhaled a breath she had been holding for years. It's just...
I never expected anyone to understand. I've lived in fear for so long that the idea of someone accepting me for who I really am feels unreal. John nodded, understanding more than he could express. I may not fully understand your past, he said, but I do understand the courage it takes to survive, and to share even a part of your story with me. That's something important. Over the following days, John began to notice small details that made him realize the depth of Elena's careful life. She avoided leaving footprints in the soft soil, stepped lightly over cracks in the sidewalk, and always kept her distance from the road. She spoke cautiously, measuring every word, as if even casual conversation could be dangerous. And yet, despite these careful habits, she returned to his garden every morning, drawn by the rare sense of safety it offered.
Curiosity gnawed at John. He wanted to understand more about her life on the run, but he also feared that pressing too hard could push her away.
He decided to approach the matter delicately. One morning he asked, Do you ever think about returning to your family, or is that impossible?
Elena's eyes flickered with pain.
Impossible, she whispered. Some family members, they would not let me live in peace. They would try to control me again. I had to leave to survive. And even now I cannot be sure that danger is gone. That's why I move quietly, keep a low profile, and avoid people who might recognize me. John nodded slowly. He realized that her survival depended not just on hiding, but on constant vigilance. Her quiet movements, cautious speech, and avoidance of attention were all part of a lifetime of strategies to stay safe. Yet despite the constant threat, she had found her way to his garden, a small sanctuary in which she could rest, even for brief moments. Have you ever considered telling someone your full story? John asked gently. Someone who could help you? Elena shook her head.
Elena shook her head.
No. I've learned that too much exposure is dangerous.
Even the slightest mistake could undo everything I've worked for. And besides, most people wouldn't understand. They would judge or fear me, or try to control me in return. It's safer to stay quiet, to keep moving, and to trust very few people. John respected her wisdom, even if it pained him to know how isolated she had been. He had never imagined the depth of courage it took to live like this, day after day, always alert, always careful, always carrying the weight of fear and survival. Despite the tension, a subtle bond grew between them. Each morning they shared moments of quiet understanding, sometimes with words, sometimes in silence. John began to notice small signs of gratitude in Elena. A slight relaxation of her shoulders when she sipped water. A soft smile when she realized she could safely sit in the garden without fear. And he, in turn, felt a sense of responsibility, a quiet determination to protect her in the ways he could. One day, John decided to do something small, a gesture that would not expose her but would show her that he cared. Planted a few extra flowers along the edge of the garden, their bright colors standing out among the greenery. When Elena arrived that morning, she noticed the flowers and paused, a faint smile crossing her face. "They're beautiful," she said softly, kneeling to touch the petals. You do this for me?" John shook his head. "For both of us," he said. "A small corner of the world where we can feel safe even for a little while." Elena looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She had lived most of her life in fear, moving quietly through shadows, trusting no one. Yet here, in a small suburban garden, she had found someone who respected her boundaries, acknowledged her story, and offered safety without judgment. Over time, John began to piece together more details about her past. She had changed her name legally, moved across multiple states, and created a life carefully hidden from those who might recognize her. She spoke of fleeting friendships, towns she had passed through, and the constant vigilance required to avoid detection. Each story, each detail revealed the strength, resilience, and intelligence that had allowed her to survive years of uncertainty and danger. And yet, despite the challenges she faced, Elena continued to return to his garden. She sought moments of calm, glimpses of normalcy, and brief connections with someone who did not threaten her. For John, this was a revelation. He had expected a simple, quiet neighbor, but instead had discovered a woman of courage and complexity, someone whose life had been shaped by history, culture, and survival in ways he could scarcely imagine. The garden became their refuge. It was more than a place with flowers and vegetables. It was a sanctuary where Elena could rest, speak in fragments, and feel human again. And for John, it became a place where he could witness strength, resilience, and trust grow. Not in grand gestures, but in the quiet sharing of moments and the patient understanding of a complicated life. As the days passed, John understood that Elena's story was not just about survival. It was about identity, history, and the courage to live authentically, even when the world made that difficult. And though her full past remained shrouded in secrecy, the trust she had placed in him was real, a fragile, powerful bond formed in the soft light of dawn among roses and vegetables in the quiet corners of a suburban garden. As the weeks passed, John and Elena's quiet routine became an unspoken rhythm, a small connection forged in the early light of the garden. The flowers he had planted seemed to flourish under her gentle care, and the vegetables grew taller and healthier with her attention. There was a sense of shared purpose now, a silent acknowledgement that the garden had become more than a plot of land. It was a sanctuary, a place where trust, care, and safety coexisted in the soft sunlight. One morning, Elena arrived earlier than usual, her expression tense, breaths. John noticed immediately. She glanced around the garden, her eyes scanning the fence line and the street beyond, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. For the first time, he sensed genuine fear in her demeanor, the kind of alertness that went beyond habit or caution.
"What is it?" he asked gently, moving closer but keeping a respectful distance.
I think someone might have been following me," she whispered. "I don't know who or why, but I felt it yesterday, and today I couldn't ignore it." John's stomach tightened. Though he had always known her life was complicated, hearing about a potential immediate threat brought the abstract dangers she had described into sharp focus. "We need to be careful," he said. "Tell me what you noticed." She described the brief glances of a car slowing down near her as she walked through the neighborhood, the faint footsteps she thought she heard behind her the day before, the feeling of eyes watching her through windows.
Her voice was calm, controlled, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. John thought for a moment.
"I'll keep an eye out," he said. No one will get close to you while you're here, and I'll do what I can to make sure you're safe." Elena looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and worry. "I know you can't fix everything," she said softly, "but it helps to know someone is looking out for me, even just here." From that moment, John became even more vigilant. He adjusted his daily routines, spending extra time outside the house watching the street, noting cars that lingered too long, observing people who seemed out of place. For Elena, the garden became even more precious, a fortress of quiet and calm amid uncertainty. And for John, it became a responsibility he did not take lightly, knowing that her survival depended, in part, on his careful observation and readiness to intervene if necessary. Despite the lingering danger, their bond deepened. They spoke more openly now, sharing stories that had been too painful to voice before. Elena recounted childhood memories of her Apache heritage, stories of resilience, community, and survival passed down through generations. She spoke of moments of joy, celebrations that had been brief but meaningful, and the lessons she had carried into adulthood. Each story added layers to her personality, revealing a woman of depth, courage, and complexity far beyond what John had initially imagined. John, in turn, shared small details of his own life. His childhood in a quiet town, his love for gardening, the loss of friends and family over the years, and the solace he found in the rhythm of tending to plants. Though his experiences were ordinary compared to Elena's extraordinary survival, she listened with attention, offering gentle questions and reflections that made him feel seen in a way he rarely had. One morning, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elena paused in her tasks and looked at John with a seriousness he had not seen before.
"I want to show you something," she said.
Curiosity piqued. John followed her to a small corner of the garden he had never paid much attention to. Elena knelt and carefully dug into the soil with her hands, revealing a small wooden box she had buried months before. Inside were a few personal items: a faded photograph of her late husband, a small handcrafted necklace with symbols of her Apache heritage, and a journal filled with carefully written notes. "These are pieces of my past," she said softly. "Things I've carried with me, things I've hidden to survive. I've never shared them with anyone until now." He understood the courage it took to reveal even these fragments of her life, the trust inherent in showing someone the very things one has protected for so long. He knelt beside her, careful not to disturb the items, and nodded. "Thank you for sharing this with me," he said. "I promise to honor your trust." Elena smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and vulnerability in her expression. For the first time, she seemed to relax, her shoulders losing some of their habitual tension. In that moment, John realized that trust was not built in grand gestures, but in quiet acceptance, patience, and consistent care. Days continued, and with each morning their bond strengthened. Yet the threat that Elena sensed lingered, a shadow at the edges of their fragile sanctuary. John knew he had to act carefully. He spoke with a few trusted neighbors, discreetly ensuring that no unusual activity went unnoticed. He also began installing small measures around the garden: subtle lighting, fences reinforced in ways that did not draw attention, and a clear line of sight to the street to make it a safer space for Elena without alarming anyone. Despite the tension, there were moments of joy. They laughed together over small mistakes in the garden, shared stories of childhood adventures, and marveled at the tiny seedlings growing into vibrant plants. These moments reminded them both that life could still hold beauty and normalcy, even in the midst of fear and uncertainty. One afternoon, as they rested on the bench with a soft breeze rustling the leaves, Elena spoke quietly. "I never imagined I could feel safe anywhere," she said. "But here, in this garden, with you, I feel like I can breathe again." "You deserve that peace," he said. "Everyone deserves a place to feel safe and cared for." Elena's eyes glistened with emotion. She reached out and touched his hand lightly, a small gesture full of gratitude and trust. For John, it was a profound moment, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed and of the courage she had shown in letting someone into her hidden world. The days turned into weeks, and the quiet bond between them grew into something unbreakable. Elena began to relax more openly in the garden, though she still maintained her careful vigilance when outside its borders. She tended the plants with dedication, arranging flowers in patterns that reflected both her creativity and the cultural symbols of her Apache heritage. The garden became a place where history, survival, and new beginnings intertwined. John, too, found himself transformed. He had entered the mornings expecting simple routines of pruning roses and watering vegetables, yet he discovered a deeper understanding of human resilience and connection. He realized that the extraordinary lives of those around us often remain hidden, waiting for patience and empathy to uncover them.
And through his care and trust, he had become part of Elena's story, offering not just safety but companionship and understanding.
One day, Elena spoke of moving forward, cautiously, but with hope.
"I can't stay in one place forever," she said. "But I want to find a life where I am not constantly running, where I can build a home and be myself without fear." John nodded. "And you will," he said. "You've survived so much already. I believe you'll find that place.
And until then, this garden, this corner of the world, will always be here for you." Elena smiled, a genuine smile that reflected both relief and hope.
"Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me, for trusting me, for letting me feel safe."
Bah. In the months that followed, their routine continued. The garden flourished under their combined care, becoming a testament to resilience, trust, and quiet courage.
Flowers bloomed in bright colors. Vegetables grew abundant and strong, and the small sanctuary they had created together offered both protection and peace. Through this shared space, John and Elena discovered that human connection could heal wounds, offer hope, and transform lives. They learned that trust, patience, and empathy were more powerful than fear, and that even in a world filled with uncertainty, moments of beauty and safety could be found. One morning, as the sun rose over the garden, John watched Elena carefully tending the plants, her face serene, her movements deliberate but relaxed. He realized that their story, born from fear, secrecy, and survival, had evolved into a quiet triumph of human spirit. In the small suburban garden, a fugitive widow had found safety. A man had found understanding, and together they had created a space where trust, peace, and hope could flourish. The garden was more than soil, flowers, and vegetables. It was a living reminder that even the most extraordinary stories can unfold in ordinary places, and that kindness, patience, and quiet care can change lives in ways no one could predict. And though the world beyond the fence remained uncertain, within its boundaries, Elena could finally breathe. John could finally watch over someone he cared about. And together they shared the extraordinary in the midst of everyday life.